This is video number 13 in a series of videos where we're making a tank battle game in Unity for Android mobile devices. Okay, so where we are at the moment is we have two tanks on our battlefield here, our scene. Okay, and at the moment we have a situation where the enemy tank is able to drive around the scene randomly. Okay, and the player can move their tank around, okay, however they wish, okay, and is also able to shoot at and destroy the enemy tank, okay, such as, and so what we have is a situation where effectively the enemy tank is unable to defend itself or to take out or destroy the player tank. Right, so that's the focus of this video, which is we're going to enable the enemy tank to find the player tank, and once it's done that, okay, it will rotate its turret, okay, to face the player tank, okay, and then it's going to fire some shells at the player tank using physics, okay, and a timer, okay, and when the enemy tank is no longer in range, okay, it's going to stop firing, okay, and continue along its path. Okay, good. So there's quite a lot of things to do, but we'll make a start. Okay, so first thing we need to do is think about the logic of this enemy tank and kind of think of a way in which how we can enable this enemy tank to detect the presence of the player tank. Okay, so let's have a look at our enemy tank here. Okay, what we have is we have here the hull and have our turret. Okay, so the hull at the moment is using this enemy tank move script, okay, which we made in a previous video. So that's moving around nicely, and it's got some health attached to it, so if we hit it, it destroys, as we've just seen. Okay, but today what we're interested in is getting this turret, okay, this turret here, to be able to face in the direction of the player and to be able to fire a shell. And it needs a mechanism to be able to know when to do that. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a trigger collider. So find your enemy turret, okay, here on your tank, and you can go add components, physics, sphere collider, okay, and just make that kind of a big number. Okay, so as you can see, I'm going to put 45 on there, see what that looks like. Okay, oh, that's okay. So basically what we have now is we have this sphere collider which surrounds this this enemy tank, and it's going to be used to detect the player tank. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to make this sphere collider over here a trigger. Okay, and if we press play, as you can see, this trigger collider, this sphere, it moves around with the enemy tank, okay, as it should. Now, you also know that the player tank has a collider attached to it, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, when the trigger collider of the enemy tank touches, enters and exits the collider of the player tank and vice versa, okay, then we're going to start shooting, right, at the player tank, and then when we get too far away, when we exit, okay, when we exit the collider of the player tank, then we're going to stop shooting at the player tank. Okay, so as you can see here, it's quite a large range. If you wanted to do some customization, alright, you could make it, you know, you could make that number bigger, okay, so it's like, depending on what tank you've got, okay, it's got like a wide detection area, or if you made this radius smaller, for example, like 20, okay, you can set this up effectively for every tank that you've got differently. Alright, so you can do some customization right there. Good. Now what we need to do is we're going to need some kind of script, okay, to say, okay, right, we've just had a trigger event. Okay, the trigger collider of the enemy tank has just collided or entered the colliders on the player tank. Okay, if you look at our player tank here, we've got some colliders. Okay, and here they are tagged player. Okay, so player here is the key. Okay, all these are tagged. All these colliders on this player tank are tagged player. Okay, right. So we kind of need to join those two things together. Those events. All right. So okay, on the enemy turret, what we're going to do is we're going to attach a script. Okay, that's going to detect when the two colliders collide or enter. One enters the other, and then we're going to make the turret rotate to look at the player, and then we're going to fire a shell using a timer. Okay, determined by the fire rate of that tank. Okay, good. So let's have a look at the script we're going to need. Okay, so you need to make yourself a C script. Okay, I've called this one enemy barrel gun. Okay, here, as you know, you go create a C script. Okay, all right, and let's have a look at this here. So you can take a screenshot now, and there. Okay, and I'll make this a bit bigger as well. Zoom in, and one more. Okay, you can take a screenshot of that. That. Okay, and let's work through this. Alright, so this script here is going to be attached to the turret, and what it's going to do, it's going to find the first of all, it's going to find the player tank, and then it's going to start shooting, and at the same time it's going to be rotating to be in the right direction, so that yeah, it shoots the shell at the player tank in the correct direction. Okay, so first things first, right, let's have a look at this script. Right, well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a ball which says enemy shooting is false. Okay, so this script, enemy barrel gun. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, enemy shooting is false. At the start of this game, okay, the enemy is not going to be shooting, so that's set to false. Good. Next thing is we have a public integer, which is the fire rate. All right, and this is going to be in seconds. So every 3 seconds, this enemy tank is going to fire a shell at the player tank. Okay, you can change this in your own game. You can have a bigger number or a smaller number, okay, depending on what tank you have. So that allows you to customize this script to your own tank, okay, because not all tanks have the same fire rate. Here we've got the false that we're going to apply to the shell that we're going to fire from the end of the barrel of the enemy tank. Okay, you've got 100 here. Again, you can modify this depending upon which tank model you're using. Okay, and here we have a public transform, which is the barrel end. Okay, and this is where we're going to be firing the shell from. Okay, it's just a position. Okay, all right, and here we have a rigid body, which is the actual shell. This is the enemy tank shell that's going to be fired at the player tank. Okay, as a prefab, and we're going to make one of those soon. Now, here we have a transform, which is the player. All right, we're going to need to know where the player is, so we're going to need to get the transform of the player. Okay, so that the turret knows which way, where to rotate, which direction to rotate correctly to. All right, and the next thing we're going to need is we're going to need the transform of the tank hull. Okay, because the tank hull might be moving in one direction and at one kind of angle, and the turret might need to be in the other direction, you know, looking in the opposite direction, and we need to make sure that the angles are the same, so that the enemy turret, the tank turret of the enemy stays on top of the tank hull while it's rotating. Okay, so we're going to need that tank hull. Good. Okay, and here we have a float, which is the turret speed. This is the speed in which the turret of the enemy tank can rotate towards the player tank. Again, here you can modify that. Okay, so 1 is like a standard, and then like if you want it the speed to be 2, it will rotate very fast. Okay, if you make it a small number like 0.5, it will rotate slowly. Okay, so again, it can be modified for whichever tank you're using. Okay, let's have a look here. So in start, what we're going to do is we are going to find the player. Okay, and we're going to say player equals find chieftain tank dot transform. Okay, we're interested in this transform, okay, because we need to know where this player is. Okay, now we're looking for the chieftain tank. Okay, now here it's saying find means, you know, find something called chieftain tank. Now in our game here, the player tank is not called player tank, it's called chieftain tank. Okay, so it's going to be looking for something called chieftain tank. And that's what it does. All right, so make sure that you put the name of the name correctly, spelled exactly the same as it is in the editor, in the inspector, otherwise it won't find it. Okay, right, next thing we need to do is we need to say, okay, right, on trigger enter and on trigger exit, do something. Right, so on trigger enter means basically, okay, here's our enemy tank. Okay, here's our turret. Right, and around our turret we put this big sphere, okay, this big collider, and it's a trigger. Okay, so when this trigger, when this big circle, this sphere, collider touches something, another collider, okay, it's gonna do something. All right, so let's have a look at that. So it says, okay, right, on trigger enter, collider other, okay, something else, some other thing. All right, if the other thing game object tag, okay, is player and enemy shooting is false, which means that it's not currently shooting, okay, then we're going to set enemy shooting to true. So that basically means, okay, we've triggered this event, we've found a player, we're in range where everything's looking good. Okay, let's start shooting at this player. All right, so enemy shooting is true. How are we going to shoot? Well, we're going to use this start coroutine. We're going to use a coroutine. Okay, and this is start coroutine, so it's going to start this coroutine, and it's called co-enemy shoot gun. All right. Okay, we'll come to that in a moment. Now, when it leaves on the on trigger exit, okay, exit. When this sphere here, okay, when the collider trigger, when it exits, which means when it leaves the colliders on the player, okay, it's going to stop shooting. All right, because it's going to be kind of like not within range. All right, now they have to be careful using the word range, because we have the range of the shell could be like, you know, right the way over here, but it won't shoot it. Okay, it depends upon the size of this trigger collider. Okay, so the detection area can be different to the range or the distance that the tank can fire the gun. Again, another way you can modify. All right, good. So here we have on trigger exit this other collider. Okay, we're going to say if, we're going to check what it is, what's the name of this, what's the tag of this, sorry, what's the tag of this collider. Okay, it's tag player. Okay, if it's player, then stop shooting. All right, stop shooting this gun. Okay, and then we set enemy shooting this to false. All right, so basically this is looking for a game object tag called player. Okay, if it finds one, it's going to start the coroutine. It's going to start shooting, and here when it exits that collider, it does the opposite. It stops shooting. All right, and says, hey, set enemy shooting to false. All right, good. So let's have a quick look at this this coroutine, which is going to shoot the gun. So here we have this little coroutine, is called co-enemy shoot gun. Okay, and basically what it does, all this is going to be doing is saying, okay, right, what we're going to do is we're going to say while true, which means it's just going to keep running. Okay, while true, just keep running. While true, we're going to run this this function here called shoot. Okay, this we're going to be using this function here, and we're going to be doing that every number of seconds. Right, so this fire rate, this basically says, right, shoot this gun every number of seconds, okay, determined by the fire rate. So that basically means, okay, shoot this gun every 3 seconds. Okay, so again, if you want this gun to be more rapid fire, again, you just mess around with the fire rate. Okay. If you want it to fire slowly, like less often, then you obviously have the fire rate larger, etc. Okay, a bigger number, a smaller number. Okay, so every 3 seconds, this is going to run this function called shoot, and shoot is actually what actually shoots the shell. Okay, all right. So this is the timer. This determines the fire rate correctly. Okay, and this is the bit that actually shoots the shell. So this shell is a rigid body shell. Okay, instantiate, create the shell prefab. Okay, which we're going to make at the barrel end position. Okay, wherever the barrel end position is at the rotation of the barrel end rotation as a rigid body. Okay, then we're going to say shell velocity, all right, equals to false or minus false times the barrel end forward. Okay, so that's basically going to create a shell, and then here it's going to be firing that shell in away from the end of the barrel, okay, towards the player tank. Okay, and then we're going to be making a sound. Okay, using the sound manager, we're just going to play a sound so as the player knows that can hear that they're under attack. Okay, good. So I can hear the enemy tanks firing shells at them. All right. Now, okay. So what this basically does is this, as I said here, this is going to fire a. If we have a look at this more closely, we have to understand the logic here. Okay, at the end of this barrel of the enemy tank. Okay, we have this position here, and this is where the shell is going to be fired from. Okay. Here it's going to be firing this shell, it's going to be creating a shell here and firing it forwards. Right, now sometimes, depending upon your tank model, it might fire it in the wrong direction. It might actually fire the shell backwards into your own tank. Right, now you don't want that, obviously. So what you need to do, or what you can do, one thing you can do is you can here I've got negative false. So if it's going in the wrong direction, then just take the negative sign off and just say false. So try it like negative false or positive false, and then one of those two will get your shell to be firing outwards away from the tank. All right, good. So all we're doing is creating a shell and firing it forwards in the direction of wherever this barrel is pointing. Okay. Now, how do we get the barrel pointing in the right direction? Okay. Alright, that's slightly more difficult, and we need to again think about some logic. Alright, now when this barrel turns, okay, we ideally don't want it to fall off of the tank, so to speak. Right, we want this enemy tank turret to stay on the tank and at the correct angle, etc, etc. Okay, and there are many ways of doing this, getting this tank turret to rotate, but here what we have is a situation where the terrain is not flat. Okay, so some methods of rotating the turret they work, but they won't give us the desired effect. Okay, the angle might be slightly wrong, or that it's just not looking right. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to, because we're dealing now specifically with this tank turret and barrel, let's put a camera on there so as we can see what's going on. Alright, so let's go camera on the barrel end. We're going to create a camera. Okay, we'll just turn off this audio listener and flare layer. Don't need any of this. So it's only for testing, it's not important, just to help us see what's going on. Okay, and set its depth to like 5 so that it renders over the top of everything. There it is there. Okay, it's run the wrong way. So 180. Move it back a little bit. Okay, we just want to see. Right, so this is the tank barrel, the enemy tank barrel. Okay, we can clearly see that, and we're going to be able to see very easily now whether it's actually pointing at the player tank. Okay, so we'll make it a bit smaller, 0.3, 0.3, and we'll move it halfway up, 0.5. Okay, yeah, so we can see here clearly what it's looking like. Okay, and so what we're going to do there, that's that. We'll make another one to look at the turret, right? So make sure the turret's rotating correctly, it's not moving off any strange angles. Okay, so duplicate this camera. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll stick that camera actually on the enemy turret. Okay, so it's going to be looking at there again. Okay, just remove all that lot. Move. Okay, we've just got another camera here. Okay, so and then this one again. Okay, again, we'll just set it the same. So we'll go, yeah, get it on depth 5, so we can see it. There it is. Okay, we'll go 0.3. 0.3. We'll move it to the other side. Okay, so we'll go 0.7. Yeah, and then 0.5 on the Y. Bring it halfway up, and there we go. Okay, so let's move this now. And this camera is monitoring the behavior of this turret. So one's looking here to see if it's firing in the right direction, and this one here is monitoring the rotation of the turret to make sure we don't have any problems with that. Okay, and we can delete them later on once we know it's working. Alright, so let's have a look at this, just make sure these cameras are working. Okay, and okay, so here this is the enemy tank. We're looking at the enemy tank view. Okay, yeah, it's going round. Okay, turret looks good. Okay, good. Right, so now let's deal with the rotation. So we come back in our script. Okay, and what we need to do is we're going to use like update. And again, as I said to you, there's many ways of doing this. Okay, you don't have to do it this way. All right, but this is just one way. Okay, so so what we're going to do is okay, in update. We already know here we're going to use this ball. Okay, enemy shooting is true or false. All right, because we only want the turret to rotate towards the player tank, the target, when it's actually supposed to. Okay, all right, so at the same time as it's firing the gun. Okay, so we're going to use this value here. So when it goes into this trigger, it's going to set enemy shooting to true. Okay, it's going to start this coroutine. It's going to start shooting the gun, and we're going to take this enemy shooting is true, and we're going to use it here to say if enemy shooting is true, then the player rotation is equal to quaternion look rotation, player position minus the position that the transform position, all right, which is the position of the game object that this script is attached to. All right, okay, so then we need to work out what the angle is. Okay, where like the angle of the enemy turret compared to what angle it needs to be facing at the player. Okay, so here we're going to go quaternion angle. Okay, and we get player rotation, transform rotation. All right, so we're looking now at here rotations. Okay, we've got here's his positions. This is rotations. Okay, and then we say if vector 3 dot, okay, transform dot transform direction, okay, vector 3 right, okay, player position minus transform position, which is like this bit again, okay, here, right, is less than 0. Okay, might sound a bit complicated this. All right, if you don't know what any of these things are, you can hover over them. Okay, and it normally gives you there you go, it tells you what these things are. Okay, Right, so basically what we've got here is we've got like an if else statement, and then if something then do this, and if something else then do that. So if, right, if it's less than 0, okay, this. If this is less than 0, then do this, right? So transform, right, rotates around the enemy tank hull position. And this is, so basically it's going to rotate based upon the enemy tank hull, the hull of the tank. Alright. Enemy tank hull up at this angle here, okay, multiplied by -1 times time.delta time times the turret speed. Okay. Else if it's not less than 0, okay, it's not less than 0, then do this else. Okay, else again, same again. Okay, it's all the same. This is the same as this except for one thing. Okay, here rotate around enemy tank hull position, tank hull up angle, got the angle times time.delta turret speed. Here we don't have this -1. All right. So we're not multiplying it by -1. We're going to be doing the opposite effectively. Okay, good. So all that's going to do is it's going to find where the player is. Okay, it's going to find the angle, okay, that it needs to move to kind of get there. It's going to say, okay, right, if this is less than 0, then we're going to kind of move. We're going to rotate around, but in like a negative here, and otherwise if it's not less than 0, then we're going to rotate around, okay, but here we're not using the negative. Okay, all right, good. And that's all that is, right? There are other ways of doing it, but this is just yeah, okay, it's just one way. Good. So now we can say, right, okay, if it's true, then we're going to be rotating our turret and we're going to be firing some shells. Okay, and when it exits, okay, when this trigger exit, we're going to set enemy shooting to false. All right, which means that it's not going to be shooting anymore. Okay, because this will only work when enemy shooting is true. So it's going to stop shooting. Okay, and we're going to stop this coroutine. Okay, we're going to be stopping the shooting here and also stopping the rotations. All right, so stopping the shooting and stopping the rotating. Right. Okay, so let's just check here. File save. All right, let's have a look at this. Okay, so here what we want to do, yeah, we've got our enemy turret, right? Because the whole focus of this is on this turret, okay? This enemy turret. Let's attach this script, the enemy barrel gun script that we just looked at, to this turret, okay? Okay, good. And it's asking for some things, right? So here's the fire rate. As I said, we can change that. Here's the force that the shell's going to be fired from. It needs the barrel end, right? So where it's going to fire this shell. So go to barrel end. This is the barrel end. Okay. Drag the barrel end in there. Okay, that's where it's going to be fired from. Okay. Here. Okay. Here, this barrel end. Good. And here we need the enemy shell prefab. Okay, we're going to have to make an enemy shell. Do that in a moment. Then we need this tank hull. Okay, again, like I said to you, we need to know where the hull is at all times, all right, to make sure that the turret, when it's rotating, stays with the hull. Okay, so we just grab the hull, grab that in there. Okay, so I've just grabbed the hull of the tank, the hull of the enemy tank here. Drag the whole thing in here. Okay, and now we need this shell. Okay, so need something for this enemy tank to fire at the player tank. Okay, so this is very similar to what we have for the player shell. Okay, the shell that the player is firing, because we're using physics on this. All right, we're not using raycasts. Okay, we're using physics. Okay, so let's have a look at our prefab that we made earlier of our tank shell. Okay, this is the tank shell that the player's using. Okay, and we're going to use exactly the same thing, except we're going to change this shell script down here for an enemy shell script. Okay, So what we can do here, yeah, is we can duplicate this, okay, and here you can duplicate, alright, rename it, call it enemy shell, whatever you want, and then drag it down here and make a prefab out of it, okay. Okay, I'll just take those out. Now I made one earlier, save some time, and here it is. It's called enemy tank shell, enemy shell. I don't know. Okay, hang on a second. Tank shell enemy. There you go. Okay, if you do delete stuff by mistake, right, you can go Control Z and it'll bring it back for you. Alright, so that's kind of handy. That's what happened there. Okay, so here we go. I've made this one earlier. It's called the tank shell enemy, and it's exactly the same as the other one except for the script. So let's have a look. So we've got this. All this is a sphere, okay, which is about the same size as the diameter of the barrel, okay, so that it fits in there. We want to try and keep things realistic, okay. So that shell will fit inside this barrel, also fit inside the down the barrel of the enemy tank too, okay. And what is it? Okay, it's a sphere. It's just a regular sphere, okay, with a mesh render on it, and it's got a rigid body. Okay, set default settings. It's got a rigid body because we're going to be adding forces to this, okay, using the physics engine. So we need a rigid body attached to this shell. Okay, and then we've got this script at the bottom called enemy shell script. So let's have a look at that. Right, so enemy shell script. Okay, you can take a screenshot there. Okay, so this is like very similar to the player shell script, okay, but some little difference. Okay, so first thing what we're going to do, this script is going to be attached to the enemy shell. Okay, it's going to be fired at the player tank. Okay, we need some particles, enemy shell particles. We'll make some of those in a moment. And what we're going to do is, okay, at start, I'm going to say, okay, destroy this game object after 5 seconds. Right, so it's like a self-destruct in there. I've put a self-destruct in there. You don't need to do that, but I did it because it's kind of like if there is a problem, if there's a problem like that, you know, shells are being fired and they go out of the scene view and don't actually hit any colliders, they could just sort of be floating around in your game forever and kind of wasting resources. All right, so I just put a self-destruct on this shell and all the shells, okay, to make sure that if something does go wrong, they are destroyed. All right, so here we have here it basically says this is here on collision enter. All right, now, okay, now this one isn't a trigger. Okay, so we're looking at the enemy tank shell. This sphere collider here is not a trigger. Okay, so it says here, okay, on collision enter, right, collision other, okay, some other thing, and what it's going to do is it doesn't matter what it hits, yeah, it's going to create some particles wherever it is at this rotation. Okay, so it basically means if it hits the ground, if it hits the player tank, if it hits anything, it's going to explode and it's going to display some particles, which is what would happen in the real world. Okay, all right, so again, we're keeping it realistic. So if on collision enter, when this shell collides as a collision with something else, yeah, basically whatever it is, just display some particles. All right, and then we're going to make a sound, an explosion sound, to confirm to the player that, hey, you know, there's some shells exploding around me, need to be a bit careful here, I might be under attack. Okay, again, in the real world you would hear sounds. Okay, and then here I'll skip this bit for a second. I've doubled this out, and if whatever the other thing, collider tag equals player, okay, then for now, yeah, just send a little message to the console over here to say, okay, enemy shell hit the player. So if if whatever this shell hits, the other thing is tagged player, okay, then send a message to the console over here so as we know that. And we're doing that for testing to make sure that it's working. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, destroy game object, okay, and then send another message to say enemy shell destroyed. Okay, now this is a self-destruct after 5 seconds, but this, just in case it doesn't hit anything and just disappears off the edge of the terrain, okay, and this one that says, okay, when you hit something, okay, display some particles, make a sound, okay, check if whatever you've hit is the player, okay, and then after all of those things, just destroy yourself, okay, and so destroy game object. All right, so here, as you can see, okay, now I've got this thing called player health here. We haven't made this yet, but basically what you could say is, okay, all right, we could attach a player health script to the player tank, okay, so like, you know, you could say, okay, if you were hit by it, depending on what tank you've got, you could say, okay, if you were hit by a shell from a light tank, okay, then you know you might lose, you know, for a direct hit you might lose, you know, 50% of your health. All right, so it'd take 2 shots for that light tank or small tank to destroy your bigger tank, more heavily armored tank. Okay, so, or likewise, if you were up against a very big heavy tank, you could say, right, okay, you know, literally that's it, 1 shot, game over. Okay, now that would all be done in a player health script. Okay, and we haven't made that, but we can come back to it. But here's the place where you want to make reference to it. Okay, so what all this means is, okay, when this shell hits something else, some other thing, do your particles, make a sound. Okay, check to see if there's a player health script attached to it. Okay, if there is, then, you know, take a hit, 1, send a value over there. All right, okay, we'll do that in another video. Okay, and yeah, there you go. All right, and then after all of that, just destroy yourself. Good. Okay, so file save, make sure that's fine, and that's attached here to the bottom of your, or attached to your tank shell enemy. All right. Good, which is a prefab. Okay, so we don't need that in the scene anymore. Okay, points to note here just to make sure this does work. Remember, your player tank is tagged player, okay, and the colliders are tagged player. Okay, good. All right, good. So here we have on our enemy tank now. Back to the turret. It's all about the turret. We want enemy shell prefab. Well, we just made that. Okay, let's put that in here. Tank shell enemy. Okay, apply that lock. Okay, and we're going to see if it works. So, okay, let's have a look. Right, so let's have a look at our enemy tank first of all. Okay, so enemy tank's going round. Okay, it's got this trigger on now. Okay, right, so let's just pause this a second. Right, so what it's done is I just heard a sound there of a shell firing and exploding on landing somewhere. So what it's done is this trigger here has entered the collider of the player tank, which it clearly has because the player tank is now inside this here. Okay, so that's worked. Okay, and what should it do? Well, it should rotate the turret towards the player tank, which is what it's done. Okay, here you can see along the turret, you can see it's clearly pointing at the player tank, and here we can see like a slight, or the beginning of a rotation. Okay, so we'll just have a quick look at this. You have to really look at this properly, and don't assume anything, because tanks are not easy to do by any means. Okay, there's a lot of things going on. Right, so here's our tank. You can see that's rotated, clearly rotated there. Okay, and as you can see, it doesn't matter. Okay, the tank's going round here. You can see this here, this barrel is always pointing at the player tank. See that? Okay, it's crushed into it there. But the point is, right, is this turret is, even though this tank now, enemy tank, is driving away from the player tank, it's still looking or firing in the right direction. Okay, you can see it up here, right? Now, when it leaves the trigger, stop firing. Alright, so that is working exactly as it should be. Last point, okay, it's starting to go up some hills here. Oh yeah, turret's still there, it's right over here now. Okay, it's up there, it's driving around up there. Okay, we could go on and on with that. So here, alright, we'll just do one more test. Just take this tank out if I can. Okay, here it comes. Alright, now we'll keep your eye on this. Right, the turret's just rotated. Now we're under attack again. But belly up. There you go, done it. Right, okay, so there you go. Right. So this all works really well. No problems at all. Good. Now, one more thing, yeah, is just to show you these particles, okay? These particles that we're using on this in this enemy shell. Okay, on the prefabs we've got particles, enemy shell. Okay, all I did there was I just used the player shell, tank shell particles, duplicated them and just made them, scaled them up a little bit. Alright, so you know, kind of like when the enemy shell lands close to the player shell, particles are bigger, and you know, it gives the sense of distance as well. Okay, a greater sense of distance, like close proximity. Okay, because the shell, the particles are much larger. Okay, good. So one more time then, and here we can see over here, we're just going to check over in our console now, right? Because visually it's working fine, but we just need to check in our console. Okay, so we've got our enemy tank driving around. There's his trigger. We'll have a look. So right, okay, into the trigger. We're under fire. Okay, definitely under fire there. You can actually see the shells coming over here. You can see that they're shooting past. Now, okay, at the moment, oh, taken. Okay, okay, that's it. Been taken out. All right. So there's a clear example of how that's definitely working. The enemy tank has shot the player tank and destroyed it. As you can see, we're now upside down over here. Okay, alright, great, it's all working, good. Alright, so that would be game over there. Good. Now, okay, just one last point here. You might be thinking yourself, well, yeah, but the sometimes with this enemy tank, yeah, because we're only dealing with the rotation of the turret and not that the barrel's moving up and down, you know, do we need to do that? And the answer is it's up to you. Okay, you can use a similar script to just move this thing up and down. Okay, but you know, this is a game here really, well, simulator. Okay, and you know, we need to give the player a chance, because if we make the enemy tanks too good, right, yeah, they're just going to be taken out straight away and not really have much of a chance. All right, so I didn't do that is because, okay, if the tank's on flat ground, okay, it's going to be able to pretty much shoot the player tank no problem. But if the player takes the enemy tanks to like rough ground or bumpy ground or hilly ground, okay, then because of the because the angle of the enemy tank is fixed horizontally, it's less likely that the player tank is going to get hit, i.e. it makes it a bit more tactical, yeah, for the player, right? Because you know, you don't really want your tank sitting out in the middle of a flat field where everyone can see it and just shoot at it at ease. All right, you really want to be sort of getting your tank behind some hills and digging it in, and you know, looking to sort of, you know, behave like a real tank would. Okay, all right, so it puts like a tactical element in the game. Again, you know, we could have just said, okay, don't even bother using physics. We'll just stick a raycast on that enemy tank. Now again, the problem with that is raycasts, you know, firing a raycast over there, that's going to hit the player first time every time, you know. And again, it's like we were thinking about a tank here. If it's like a player kind of running around taking shots, all right, they might have like an enemy of health and they could take like you know, 100 shots and then knock them out. But with a tank, I mean, if one tank, you only really get one chance in a tank, okay? So it's not like, oh, we can give the tank 100 health and it can take 100 shots to destroy it. That wouldn't be realistic, okay? At most, it's probably get 2 chances to destroy your tank, to destroy an enemy tank. So we need to look at stuff like that as well. So I didn't use raycasts. I used physics for that to give it an element of reality. But again, it's up to you. It's up to you. All right. But I think this is for this particular example, using physics is more appropriate. Okay. All right. So that's the end of this video. Everything's working fine. Okay. Hope you learned something. Please subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up if you like the video. And yeah, thank you.